Hello again. So in this video I want to give some details about the study cycle. So I briefly talked about it in the introduction, and you may have found this video because you want to know some more information, or maybe you're struggling a bit with understanding the content, so you want to use this method, the study cycle, which is a scientifically proven way to learn. A very good technique. It's not brand new. It's based on a lot of things that people have been doing for a long time to learn, but it puts them all together into a cohesive framework. And part of what I'll talk about today is I'll give justifications for each stage. So we'll start by talking about previewing material, and I'll get into, well, why that's important, and why would you bother investing 10 minutes into previewing. So hopefully that can show you how the study cycle works, and also kind of give you some justification for why this is a good technique to use. It's not set in stone. When we get to later stages like studying and checking, there's a lot of flexibility, and I'll give you some options on how you can do that and point to resources that have even more. And there you really need to find the techniques that work for you. So there's a lot of common ones. Some will work better in some courses than others. Some work better for some people more than others. So it does take some experimentation and tweaking of this for each type of class and for each person. So first of all, an overview of the 5 stages, so shown here in this nice diagram. So the suggested way to study within this study cycle is to preview material before class, then attend class. That's the easiest one. That's the one that we all do. And then as soon as possible, preferably immediately after classes, just briefly review that material. And preview and review are both short stages, so that's good, not a huge time investment there. And then the latter half of the study cycle is where most of the time is probably spent. And that's where you're studying, and then you're checking your understanding. And this is kind of a cycle within a cycle. So you study, you check how well your studying is going, and then you study some more, and then you check how well your studying is going, and you may go through this loop 3 times. It may only take 1 time. Maybe the content's easier, or maybe you already know some of it, so it wasn't too hard to grasp. But really, you need to go through that cycle as many times as necessary to master that material. So that's the study cycle at very kind of broad strokes. Some background to the study cycle: there's a great book that talks about it and how to implement it, with lots of creative ideas for each stage, and that's Teach Yourself How to Learn by Sandra McGuire. This book is fairly affordable. It's less than $20 on Amazon, even less if you want a Kindle version. And it's a great read, and I really recommend this if you want to delve deeper into this study cycle. There are lots of great resources on the web about the study cycle, and I think my favorite is the Learning Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I really wanted to reference them because a lot of the text you're going to see in the upcoming slides is straight from their website. But you can go to their website and they elaborate on all of the stages. So this is kind of the main page where it talks about the study cycle, gives a brief summary of the 5 stages, and then from there they have links. Almost every stage has another page with even more information about it. And the sub-pages that we'll look at today that are more applicable to our class are effective note-taking, active learning techniques, that's that website they call Study Smarter, Not Harder, and metacognitive study strategies. That is about as hard to say as that stage can be to do. So maybe that's a fitting name. So I'll give you one take on the study cycle, but check out those websites because they're free and there's tons more information. Also not overwhelming, so you can read them in just an hour or so. And if you want to go even deeper, I would recommend that book by Sandra McGuire. All right, first stage. So I'm sure you've heard before that it's helpful to preview information before you even go to class. Now, in a maybe more traditional class, you would have a textbook with some readings to do. And some of those websites, they'll give you good advice on how to skim a textbook before a class. Because often, you don't have time to read a whole textbook chapter, and it may also be too confusing to read the whole chapter before you've had the class. In our class, we don't have readings, but what you can do are read or skim the PowerPoint slides. Now, why would you do this? Well, you will get more out of attending the lecture if you already have some context for what you're about to learn. And I think the way I described this last time is by previewing, you're priming your brain. Your brain is already starting to lay a foundation to build that new information upon. And that will allow you to learn and retain more from the class if you have previewed versus if you haven't previewed. So if we took two identical twins, I wonder if they've done this, it's probably a good study design, two identical twins, and one of them previews the class by skimming the slides or the textbook, the other one does not. They both then attend the class. If you then tested them immediately following the class, the identical twin who had previewed would have learned more from that class. So previewing, the great thing about it, it's a small investment, but it has big returns. Overall, it's going to make you more efficient at learning. When you skim the slides, 2 points I made here is try to ask yourself some questions about the content. So if you just passively read the slides, in one ear, out the other, it's not helping that much. You need to be actively engaged with the material, and you're going to see that's kind of key to every single stage of the study cycle. So as you read the slides, ask yourself, what are we going to learn about today? Even just knowing the basic concepts will help. And then, what are the main points? So previewing, overall, doesn't take too long, not too complex, but a good return on investment. Attending class. So we all know that, of course, we should go to class, or in this case, go to class virtually. And the key here, again, is to be actively engaged in class. And one thing that is shown to really help with this is to take notes. So it really helps to, I kind of want to say, trick you to be actively engaged, because it can be easy to sit back, relax, and not be actively engaged with the class. But if you're engaged and trying to take notes, you can't really take notes while being unengaged with the class. So if you're taking notes, it's a good way to ensure that you're actively engaged. So as the slide says, actively taking notes during class can help you focus and better understand main concepts. So taking notes will help you better remember what you hear and see. So again, if we took those identical twins, so this time they don't, let's say they both preview before class, and then in the class we just tell one to take notes, one not to take notes. The student who takes notes is going to learn more from that class and retain more information. So they're going to be more efficient at learning. And if both of them are investing the same amount of time, let's say the class is 50 minutes, but one learns more in 50 minutes than the other, then that's better. That's obviously the approach we want to use. We want to be more effective with the same amount of time. When you take notes, the style of note-taking can depend on the class, but in this class I think it's important to just focus on the main points. So you don't need to write down verbatim what I say, but try to figure out what the main points are from the class. And that will really help you start to connect those main points together. And the more you can connect things in your mind, the easier it is to remember. So if I give you a list of 10 random numbers, then those are very hard to remember. But if, let's say there's an order to those numbers, like let's say the numbers, instead of being 10 random numbers, they're 10, 20, 30, 40, there's some order there, well, that's a lot easier to memorize. And it's the same way with content. If the whole course or the whole class is very confusing to you, it's like trying to remember 10 random numbers. But if you can create a logical sequence out of that that makes sense to you, it's far easier to remember. And that's one thing that we're trying to do with each stage, is understand how the material fits together so that it's easier to remember. Yeah, so here's a good pictorial example. So these students, they're engaged. I'm unsure whether they're taking notes, but that's a good way to ensure you're engaged. And of course, if instead the two students, look like this, then they're obviously not engaged, and they would not be retaining information as well as they were earlier. So third stage here is study. Oh, sorry, pardon me, I'm jumping ahead. Third stage is review. So immediately after class, or as soon as possible while the information is fresh, because even an hour after class, your mind is already going to start forgetting information. Unfortunately, that's how our minds work. So as soon as possible, review that information. And what you can do in your notes is you can fill in gaps and figure out what you might need help with. And that might also already give you some hints at what you need to study. So as you're going through, you're like, oh yeah, I understand this, oh, I'm confused about this concept. Well, make a note that that's something you should go back to and study. Now, when you're reading back through your notes as you review, again, here's this theme we keep coming back to, you need to make sure you're actively engaging with the material. And here's a good quote from that website. Passively letting your eyes scan over the material won't help much. Instead, explain the material to yourself. Summarize the key points. Again, find the connections. Ask questions and think about the big picture. Start to plan out how you might want to study the material you've learned. If you followed steps 1 and 2, so preview, attend, this will be the third time you're engaging with this content. Repeated exposure to the material helps you remember and understand it more effectively. So just like anything else, the more times you practice something, and if this is your third go through that material, I mean, each one was a little different, preview, attend, review, but that's going to be making more connections, consolidating, learning, retaining more information in a cohesive, meaningful way. The other thing I'll say about this stage is it doesn't take long. So they suggest maybe 10 or 15 minutes. But again, it's going to yield a great investment. So just a little bit of extra time, but you're going to come away from attending that class with more information if you review versus if you don't review. Okay, we're now getting into some of the really vital stages. Well, I mean, we know we need to go to class, obviously. That's important, but a lot of the time is needs to be spent in studying and checking how well your studying is going. So the latter half of this study cycle. I'll have several things to say here because this is maybe a more complex stage, and there's also more ways one can approach studying. So what you're looking for here are brief but intense study sessions, as they tend to be more effective than trying to study for many hours at a time. And there's a few reasons for this. But if you try to study for 8 hours, it's really hard to be vigilant and optimal with your learning for a long period of time. But even if you can, and some people can do that, science has shown across many skills, distributing practice, so instead of practicing, say, 8 hours all at once, but having 8 study sessions of 1 hour long, so the same total amount of time, when you distribute practice, you learn more from that. And we're going to come back to this at the end of our class when we talk about motor learning. But know that it's true about studying as well. Distributing practice is beneficial. It's also true of motor skills. Now, when you're studying, it's important to eliminate distractions. And here, research is very clear about multitasking. So if you try to do 2 things at once, you are going to end up doing both of those things poorly. Or I should say maybe worse than you could do either of those things individually. So if you're studying and at the same time, every once in a while you answer a text or things like that, or maybe you check your emails and then you return to studying, well, what you're really doing is you're studying and, say, texting poorly. So you're essentially wasting your time because, let's say, throw some numbers at this. Let's say for an hour you study for 45 minutes, and every now and again you answer a text, and that adds up to be 15 minutes. So you've spent an hour doing those two things, and you've tried to multitask. Well, the quality of your text may not change, but what they've shown is that the quality of your learning has decreased. So even though you spent 45 minutes learning, because those texts kind of came and distracted you, your overall learning compared to someone who, say, spent 45 minutes just studying and not answering any texts is worse. So here I would say, don't shoot yourself in the leg here. Although studying, is not maybe inherently as enjoyable as talking to your friends over text, it's important to set aside distraction-free time to study because it's more efficient. And we only have so many hours in the day, so to study it's important unless you have lots of free time and it doesn't matter, which is probably unlikely. But it's good to really do these things as efficiently as possible, and that really comes back to why we preview and why we review, because it makes us more efficient at learning. So when we study, it's important to use active learning techniques. And there are many different active learning techniques. One of those websites gives many examples, and I'm going to talk about kind of two of my favorite, or maybe two of the more common ones. And the first is, try to explain the material in your own words as if you are the teacher. Now from the website they say, you can do this in a study group, with a study partner, or on your own. And they've even shown that you can put a teddy bear, a doll, an action figure out, and pretend it's a person and explain it to it. Or even pull over an empty chair, pretend someone's sitting there, and explain the content to them. And the reason for this is that saying the material aloud will point out where you are confused and where you might need to put more study time into. And I've had students tell me before that, I watch your presentation, or either on YouTube or in class, and I understand it when you talk about it. And that's good. That's a great step. It's, we don't want me to be explaining things and you to be lost. So that's good that when I explain a concept, you understand it. But all that really says is that you can tell that I am ready to take the test. If you understand it when I explain it, that means I am ready to take the test. Unfortunately, I am not taking the test for you. You have to take the test. So we need you to be able to explain that information so that you understand it, I guess, at a deeper level. And the way you can test that is, okay, I think I understand this concept. Can I explain it aloud? Rather than just hearing me say it and say, oh yeah, I got this. You need to go a bit deeper. You need to say, do I really understand this? Do I understand Dr. Blinch saying it, but do I understand it fully? And often when you try to teach it to someone, even if that's an empty chair, you might realize, oh, you know what, I don't have this down yet. I understand when it's told to me, but I'm not ready to explain it myself. In other words, I'm not going to be ready to explain this myself on the test. Another great option here is to quiz yourself. So there are the sample questions, but a deeper way to quiz yourself is to create your own quiz. So try to think about, what does the instructor want me to know? How might the instructor test me on this information? And critical in this class, how might I be asked to apply this information? Because remember, because it's open book, a lot of the questions are going to be application-based. So that's the study phase. There's many other ways to study, and the website talks about many of those. So if you want some more ideas, take a look at that. But let's move on to the fifth phase here. So you can do all of those previous stages. You can invest a lot of things and things can still go wrong. And that's why it's very critical to do this last phase where you check your understanding. This isn't necessarily a long phase, kind of like previewing and reviewing, but it's critical. You need to check in with your own understanding, which we refer to as metacognition, so thinking about your own thinking. And from the website, I really like this quote here. They say, "Do you spend a lot of time studying but feel like your hard work doesn't help your performance on tests? You may not realize that your study techniques, which may have worked in other classes, don't necessarily translate to how you're expected to learn in this course." And remember, there's two things about this course. One, we talk about abstract theoretical concepts. That's fairly novel to other courses in kinesiology. And two, it's open book and you're going to be asked mostly application questions. So you may have some great study habits that work really well for closed book tests, where maybe you're asked more at the level of remembering and understanding. So you really need to check yourself, and here it says you need to be honest with yourself and be open to changing your technique if it's not working. And this can be challenging, and I found as an undergrad, in every class I would have to find, okay, how do I have to study for this class, for this type of content, and maybe not necessarily just the content, but for the way I'm going to be evaluated on that content. So I could take 2 exercise physiology class, but with different instructors, they might test in different ways, and that is going to influence how I need to study and how I check whether I'm learning the material. So again, the website, because this is a critical and difficult stage, it's hard to think about your own learning, especially if it's not something you're very practiced with. There's lots of suggestions. But kind of key to this are asking yourself metacognitive questions. So these are self-reflective questions. Take the time to be introspective and honest with yourself about your comprehension. And I like that latter part where it says honest with yourself, because if you simply say, well, I put in 3 hours, I should know this, well, you may or may not. Those 3 hours may not have been invested effectively, or you may have been using a strategy that works in other classes but not this one. So it's very important to be honest with yourself and try to assess whether you've got this information or you don't. And here's a list of some metacognitive questions. So you can ask yourself, does this answer make sense given the information provided? What strategy did I use to solve this problem that was helpful? So sometimes when you solve an answer, in the sample question it says, hey, what's the answer? Let's say it's a numeric question, and 125. You look at the answer, 125. Well, you might need to go a little deeper. How did you come to that answer? And being able to understand that process will allow you to apply that information in a deeper, more complex way. How does this information conflict with my prior understanding? How does this information relate to what we learned last week? And that one's great, because each module, although it is somewhat of an island, they're interconnected. It's not like each module is an entirely different course and nothing connects. Everything connects within motor behavior. And being able to establish those connections, again, is going to make it easier to understand and apply that knowledge. What questions will I ask myself next time I'm working these types of problems? And that's good because you're probably going to see those problems on the test. What is confusing about this topic? What should I study more of? What might I need to reach out to Dr. Blinch and ask him for help with? What are the relationships between these two concepts? Again, relating things to each other. What conclusions can I make? And lastly here with metacognitive questions, another great thing is to try brainstorming some of your own questions. So these are some very formulaic ones that are general for most content, but you may need to have more specific metacognitive questions related to what you're trying to learn. All right, so that is the study cycle. Let's maybe just review it one more time here. So, start by previewing what you're going to learn. And in this class, you can read through the PowerPoint presentation in advance. Then, watch the YouTube presentation and be active in your observation. And you can help yourself do that by taking notes. Remember, just look for the main points, the themes. You don't need to write down verbatim what is said. Immediately after class, or as soon as possible, review your notes. And you need, again, to be actively engaged. So it's not just a matter of going, oh, yeah, read my notes, blah, blah, blah. But do you understand your notes? Are there big things you've missed? When you go through it again, hopefully each time you're understanding that material at a deeper level. So that's the first basic part. That's all related to pre and post attendance in class. And then the second half is the study and check your understanding. So when you study, have short, intense sessions. Make sure that they're as distraction-free as possible. And then when you learn, use active learning strategies. Basically, I guess the take-home here is you can't be passive and learn something. And there's some very interesting research along these lines, even in terms of motor skills. But you have to be actively engaged. So when you study, use techniques that require you to be active. So just reading your notes, you're going to learn very little from that. Yes, it's helpful when you review, but when you study, you now need to be understanding that material at a deeper level. So use those active learning techniques. And my favorite is really explain that information as if you were the instructor. And then critically, every once in a while, at the end of each study section, test or check your understanding. And this is where you may have realized that, that didn't work, or it's not enough. Maybe if I do it again, maybe it will be enough, but maybe you really need to switch up your strategies. And for way more information on these stages and more ideas, especially how to study and how to use metacognition, you can refer to those websites. And if you want to go even deeper, that book by Sandra McGuire is great. All right, I hope that helps. If you have more questions about the study cycle, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss kind of strategies you've tried, things that have worked for you, and maybe give you some pointers that can help you find the right tools to make you successful in this class. And then the great thing is, although you have to tweak this cycle in different courses, it's not entirely new every time. So every time you learn a technique, you're going to get better at the study cycle, and that's going to help moving forward in other classes and with anything you're trying to learn in life.